Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this important discussion regarding racial justice in action. My name is Candace Gomez, and I'm a partner at the law firm of Bond, Schoeneck King. I would like to take this opportunity to thank certain individuals who have assisted in making this program possible. Nila Sikander, Kimberly Wolf-Price, David Ferrara, and Kathy Purdy. Thank you so much for your help in creating this program. Those attorneys who are seeking CLE credit should listen out for a CLE code during this program, which you will need to enter on your CLE affirmation page. If you have any questions regarding CLE credit, please contact our marketing supervisor, Kathy Purdy, who will be placing her email address in the chat box of this webinar so that you can contact her. Also, please note that there is a Q&A box on your screen where you can feel free to go ahead and enter questions during the webinar. At this time, I am very honored to introduce our panelists. These panelists have gone beyond the typical workplace conversations and roundtable discussions to actually exemplify racial justice in action. Racial justice is not a spectator sport where we can stand on the sidelines and hope that someone else will take the lead. We all have a role to play if we're going to live up to the promise of equality in this nation. This program is designed to accomplish two goals. First, to celebrate those leaders who have taken up the mantle of diversity, equity, and inclusion in order to move us forward. And second, to give us the opportunity to learn from these leaders so that we can think about ways to combat systemic racism in our own organizations. Hoyt Webb is the Senior Vice President and General Counsel of Legrand, North and Central America. Robert Feliciano is the President of the Board of Education for the Brentwood Union Free School District. Chantel Simmons is the Human Resources Director for the Episcopal Diocese of New York. Robert Troiano Jr. is the President of the Board of Education of the Westbury School District. Wesley Alexander is the Chief Executive Officer of CoBiz Richmond, Incorporated. Bios for each of these panelists are available in the materials that were sent to each participant earlier today. In creating this program, there were two competing quotes that kept emerging in my mind. On the one hand, there was the quote, "Be the change you wish to see in the world," which is a powerful statement about personal responsibility and concrete actions. That is what we are striving for in this program. On the other hand, I don't think that we can ignore that there are those who have felt somewhat disappointed by the performance of racial justice shown by certain companies, which may not have been matched by significant efforts towards achieving equitable outcomes within their own organizations. And perhaps the best quote to describe that feeling is the James Baldwin quote, "I can't believe what you say because I see what you do." To dig into this issue, we turn first to Hoyt Webb. Hoyt, thank you so much for joining us today. I just wanted to start by explaining a bit about Legrand, which is a wonderful company. It's a remarkable multinational company, and its North and Central American division has more than 6,700 employees. Hoyt, when we spoke in preparation for this webinar, you made a statement that I think is so important. You mentioned that after the killing of George Floyd, during a time when many companies were rushing to make public statements in support of Black Lives Matter, your company took a slightly different approach. The CEO of your company wanted your company to be able to back up its statements with tangible actions, which resulted in your company forming a working group and putting some critical initiatives in motion before making a public statement. So the question for you, Hoyt, and thank you so much for being here today, is can you please tell us about the journey that Legrand has taken to support diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Happy to, and thank you again for inviting me to participate in this great panel. I'm so pleased to be among peers with the same levels of commitment and interest in social justice, diversity, and anti-racism. your point is very, very well made. Our CEO, John Seldorf, is a very practical and pragmatic person who is always talking about lining up, as he refers to it, the say-do. And, he jumped on to the bandwagon of heightened scrutiny by turning that lens first internally and saying, look, let's pull together a group of employees across ages and subcultures within our company, which consists of over 20 agglomerated acquisitions, 15 of which occurred in the last 3 years. And let's have this working group inclusive of African-American associates and executives, as well as representatives from our women's group called L, the LGBTQ community, and leaders of our divisions, and create a safe space to have a dialogue. And this was a very bold move on John's part, and I applaud him for it. That dialogue began with an open platform for all of these individuals to talk about their experiences, both outside and inside the company. And this dialogue went on daily for over an hour each day for close to 3.5 weeks, just to give you a sense. And people were, talked about, the cab not stopping for them, or people be following them in stores, or this experience or that experience, things that people have read about, but maybe in their lives hadn't met someone who had one of those experiences. And the conversation quickly turned to, okay, what about our environment? How do we address concerns about equal treatment in our environment, and what we're doing to make all of our employees, especially and particularly our Black or African American associates, feel comfortable, welcomed, included at Legrand. And so the working group began to parse out ideas around what to do. Those ideas included an employee experience survey, and a soup to nuts kind of review, numbers review relative to hirings, retention, et cetera, promotional reviews, pay equity reviews. All of these things, were put on the table, gathered into boxes and categories, whether they were internally or externally focused, and sub-teams from the working group began to drive and consolidate those ideas down into effective actions. At the same time, in order to facilitate this dialogue, particularly for Caucasian members of the group who had not had personal experience with either lifelong or systemic racism, there were a set of agreed upon readings on a set of agreed upon topics, on a set and agreed upon timeline, from historical to microaggression to intersectionality and the rest of it. And that allowed the working group to all get on the same page in understanding some of the roots of the problems in the United States, and how they might also, in particularly, present themselves within a corporate atmosphere. Clearly topics like white privilege were quite challenging, a little more sensitive, but the safe space that our CEO created and demonstrated with his leadership that he was willing to support really made that work. So to drill down a little bit more succinctly, we ended up agreeing that we needed to hire a facilitator. We ended up securing the assistance of Dr. J.R. Robinson down at Rutgers, who would come and try and help us leverage known policies and practices to implement those within the organization. we quickly did come out with a statement that was posted throughout the company, and in his weekly video presentations that had previously, I guess in the early months, early March and April, had focused mostly on updates related to COVID. He began to talk about what this working group was doing, getting people excited about potentially joining. And we ended up with many, many associates who were banging on the doors to contribute ideas and to contribute personal efforts toward being part of the affinity group, toward vetting potential education materials. We came up with a preparatory educational program. We've told everybody we're going to have required education around diversity and inclusion, social justice. And we issued in 3 subsets, very brief preparatory education, 2 to 3 pages worth of reading and a video for each module for people to consume and begin having that dialogue. We sent the purchasing steering committee to look at vendor spend analysis, to look at our spend contribution to minority-owned, women-owned businesses. We asked that the programs that we currently run in our corporate social responsibility programs, which include Better Communities and Better Schools, look to see if those Better Community and Better School programs already included communities of color or whether they could do a better job at it. We looked at, we did a survey and focus groups. We just got the results on those, including a control group of non-African Americans and a control group of African Americans, and with all the statistical significance and metrics that are used to analyze those types of surveys, and we're using those to direct results. We ultimately decided we needed, and with John and again, in our HR lead, Ken Brown's support, we decided to create formal structures for the longevity of this effort. And we elected to follow the CEO action plan. You can go there on the web and you can see what other CEOs have done. You can share experiences, policies, practices, learn how people have done this so we don't have to reinvent the wheel each time we approach a different topical area. And it created a steerco from the executive members of the working group to oversee these other efforts. And then we opened those efforts up to everybody who was waiting in the wings and said, okay, now let these people know who are going to lead these particular efforts around the workplace, around the community, around, our giving and so forth. Let them know how you'd like to participate. We're launching mentor programs and other things as we learn that these things have had positive impact, meaningful impact in the employee's sense of self-worth, respect, dignity in the workplace and participation. We've just started deploying. And we actually are scrambling to make sure that we account for what we're doing. And we tell people where we're doing things and how those things are going. So it's been an interesting, very, very interesting and a beneficial journey for everyone involved. And we're really excited to make this a part of our DNA going forward. I'll stop there. I don't want to go beyond my time.
No, that was terrific. Thank you so much, Hoyt. I think it's terrific that Legrand has set such a perfect example for the rest of us to follow. You really took a top to bottom approach when it comes to this effort. And you mentioned so many different facets and areas. And I think that your comments are just deeply appreciated by all of us. So thank you. And I'm sure we'll have more questions for you later. We have almost 500 participants on this webinar, and I do see some questions coming in. We'll do our best to address them. But before we get to those other questions, I wanted to, at this time, turn to our next presenter, who is Robert Feliciano, the president of the Brentwood School Board. And Robert, Brentwood took an unusual action by leading a fight against New York State in order to demand equitable funding for the students. And just to give people some background as to why you chose to take up this fight as a school board, Brentwood is the largest suburban school district in New York State. It has 19,000 students, 93% of whom are either Black and or African American or Hispanic/Latino. It's a high poverty school district. In New York State, the average expenditure per pupil, so the amount that they spend per student on average in New York State, is $23,000. In Brentwood, however, you only receive approximately $19,000 per student. So that's a shortfall of about $4,000 per student, which is significant. And even more than that, in New York, a predominantly minority school district is nearly 3 times more likely to be underfunded than a predominantly white school district. And New York State's debt to Brentwood continues to grow by at least $100 million per year. So in light of all of that, a complaint was brought by the school district with a federal agency, the Office for Civil Rights, to examine this and to take a look at how New York State was distributing funds. And I need to give a shout out here to my colleagues, Kate Reed and Howard Miller, who kind of laid the template, the blueprint for this type of complaint, which had been used in other districts that we were able to kind of follow the blueprint of when it came to Brentwood and Westbury. So Robert, the question for you is, unfortunately, there are dozens of minority school districts throughout New York State that have been underfunded for decades, just like Brentwood, and continue to be underfunded. What made the Brentwood Board of Education decide that you were going to take on this David versus Goliath battle by going up against New York State to demand equitable funding for your students?
First, let me start with thank you to you, Candace, for putting this together. And really, I mean, it's an honor to be sitting here with the panelists in front of me. It's wonderful to see that we have so many people who are willing to take up this mantle in terms of social justice issues. Let me just get right to it. You know, one of the things that we always recognize is that, you know, there is a problem that surrounds us. And the question that I had to ask myself is, what is it that we were going to do about it? One of the commitments that I made prior to being elected onto the Board of Education was that I was going to do everything that I could to empower the residents of the Brentwood community, fight for equitable distribution of school funding, with the hope of making the playing field for impoverished communities that are usually communities of color, just a little more fair, slightly more level. You know, so what I had to do was I had to assess what it is that, you know, was going on around us. And time again, what we see is these stories of communities being reactive to issues of social justice instead of proactive. And for me, it was just, you know, a very simple solution. You know, I was tired of playing defense, and the time to play offense had come upon us. You know, I was a member of the board for many years, a minority member at that. And once we had a majority that was willing to take this on, we did so. We did so without even thinking about it. It was just, you know, I think a moral obligation for me, and I think, you know, the rest of my board members. This was something that we had to do. It wasn't a question of whether or not we wanted to do it. This is something that, you know, that was a must do. So again, you know, going back to this idea of, you know, you know, what it is that we can do about it. Well, as a board member, I made a commitment to use every tool, every tactic, every technique at my disposal, and at the disposal of the school district to get this done. And I think that, you know, if you look at it, it's a daunting task at the beginning, but then you start to realize that you do have so many resources at your disposal. And that is what we did. You know, thanks to Schoeneck King, you put together a great argument. And I can't continue this conversation without acknowledging my brother from Westbury here, because it was a wonderful fight. You know, we teamed up with other school districts within the state to try to press this issue forward. You know, we did gather before the steps of the Nassau County Federal Courthouse with an unprecedented crowd. We were into the hundreds. And again, you know, with the partnership of the Westbury School District, we were able to, you know, bring attention to this matter. I couldn't have designed or picked or imagined a better partner to do this with than Mr. Troiano from the Westbury School Board. And you know, and it's not over. It's not over. This is just one of many causes that we, I think, have, again, the moral obligation to lead. Most of these communities that we're talking about, communities of color, communities that are impoverished, you know, are in desperate need of you know, this type of leadership. You know, it is a David and Goliath type of battle, but one that I think is worth having.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Robert. And you gave me the perfect segue to go ahead and introduce Robert Troiano, who is the president of the Westbury School Board. And as Robert Feliciano mentioned, Westbury not only joined forces with Brentwood to demand equitable funding from New York State, but you helped to form what the newspapers began referring to as the Coalition of the Underfunded, because you recruited several other minority school districts to participate in a rally that gained media attention both locally and nationally. So Robert Troiano, how do you think Westbury's actions played a role in the larger nationwide racial justice movement that we're seeing right now? Robert, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you for pointing that out. I would be happy to answer that question. But also, I want to first thank you and your partners at BSK for having the temerity to take this on. I have been just amazed by how rapidly the world is changing since the murder of George Floyd in April. I never would have thought that the state of Mississippi would actually vote to take the Confederate flag off of their flag. And it's just remarkable. But we can't lose that spirit and that momentum. And so keeping a focus on this and highlighting the need for racial justice. And I think just as importantly, providing pathways for people to know how to do that is extremely important. I'm happy to be able to talk about that with respect to the OCR, also with respect to our program for hiring more MWBs in our construction program, as well as increasing the number of diversity hirings, we say, in the Westbury School District. But in regard to the OCR, let me just point out to your listeners that Robert Feliciano and I were doing nothing more than holding the state accountable for what its own formula said we deserved in the way of state aid. The formula said that Westbury deserved in the neighborhood of $80 million a year in state aid. And Brentwood being 4 times our size, their numbers of state aid goes into the hundred millions of dollars. But how could we not? How could we not? We owe it to our students to do that. They were being deprived of $39 million in aid for educational programs. There are neighboring school districts, and we are next to Jericho, Long Island, one of the most affluent districts on Long Island. They are deprived of nothing. They are our neighbor. They are right next to us. And our students are being deprived of $39 million. The year prior to joining Brentwood, let me thank Robert Feliciano and his board for taking the initiative to start this. It was first brought to the attention of students in our high school the year that Robert did it, and 39 of them held a rally, each one representing a loss of $1 million in state aid. They took the initiative to do that. How could the Westbury board not support them by doing something on our end? I want to also thank the Westbury board for joining me and the Brentwood board. There was, like, as Robert Feliciano said, there was never any question from the Westbury board about whether or not we were going to join the suit. The only question was, how quickly can we do it? We owed it to our taxpayers. they bear the burden of trying to provide services that our neighboring districts have. And so that we pay the highest tax rate per thousand of assessed value in the town of North Hempstead. We owed it to them. And then we needed to make a statement to the state, and this gets to the question that you asked, Candace. We needed to make a statement to the state and to the country that Black lives matter too. And we're not saying that all lives don't matter and people get confused by that. All we're saying is that Black and brown lives matter. And the state's calculation said that based on our population, the demographics of our population, the level of poverty, the number of ELL students we have, we needed a certain amount of money to provide a basic sound education that's guaranteed in the New York State Constitution. We needed to hold the state accountable and help to show the country that we were doing that in case there are other pockets where basic justice is not being followed. We needed to be front and foremost about that. And that's why we joined.
Great, thank you so much, Robert. And just to kind of really close out that topic, the fight is not over. Our initial complaint to OCR has been denied, not based on the merits, but based on the fact that there is a similar case working its way through the New York State court system. But I think everyone can tell who's watching this webinar that both you, Robert Troiano, and Robert Feliciano and your respective boards are in no way laying down and going to let this fight go. So we'll continue to try to get the students of Brentwood and Westbury and similarly situated districts what they deserve according to New York State's own formula. But Robert, let's talk about the MWBEs that you briefly mentioned in your opening remarks. The Westbury Union Free School District has the unique distinction of accomplishing a goal that few other school districts have been able to do. In a recent multi-million-dollar capital project to renovate the school district's buildings, more than 45% of the work was performed by New York State certified minority and women business-owned enterprises that are more commonly known as MWBEs. In fact, the construction management company in charge of leading this large-scale and complex project is a Black-owned company. And you know what, I will pause here because we have an important chart that I think, Robert, you would be able to explain best to demonstrate exactly why it is so important for us to make sure that minority and women business-owned, minority and women-owned businesses have a fair opportunity to compete so that districts can hire qualified contractors who may not look like those that have typically been hired in the past.
Thank you, Candace. I'd like to talk about two things here. First is the why. Why do we feel it's so important to increase the number of minority and women business enterprises that are involved with our construction program, and also how we did it. And this chart provides the why, and I'll try and take you through this. But this comes from a study, a 200-page study that New York State did about the awarding of contracts for construction to minority and women-owned firms. And so what it looks at is prime construction contracts of a size between $50,000 and $2 million. And it looks at what percentage of those contracts were awarded to Black-owned firms, Asian Pacific firms, Hispanic firms, Native American, and women firms. And just to pick off some of the statistics here, and it's really hard to see, but the first set of bar charts on the left-hand side, the very first bar shows the number of contracts in New York State in the years from 2010 to 2015 that were awarded to Black firms. And that came to 1.7%. And just your sense of justice would tell you that that's disproportionately low. The New York State African-American population is about 12%. So you would expect in just a normal distribution that the number of jobs awarded to Black-owned firms would approach 10 or 12 or maybe even 15%. But it doesn't. It comes to less than 2%. For Asian firms, it comes to 0.45%. For Hispanic firms, it's 2.3%. For women-owned firms, it comes to just 14%. Well, oftentimes, owners or school districts or construction firms, prime contractors that are building for various companies or for school districts, they're quick to say, well, we couldn't find any qualified minority firms. We couldn't find any qualified women-owned firms to do the job. Well, New York State's study put the lie to that statement. What they did is they looked at the number of contracts that were in dollar amount that were awarded to MWBEs. Then they looked at the number of MWBEs that qualified for winning those contracts. And qualification was based on they had the capital, they had the bonding, they had the sufficient size, and they had the experience to win prime contracts. When you look at for Black firms, the percentage of Black-owned firms that met those requirements came to 13%. For the number of, to remind you, the number of contracts actually awarded to Black-owned firms was less than 2%. For the entire universe of MWBEs, 57% of the companies that were qualified to bid on those contracts and to win those contracts, 57% were either minority-owned or female-owned firms. Yet, only 23% of those contracts were awarded to those same firms. Less than half of the firms that were qualified to win that business won that business. That's the why. There's a disparity there. It's evident by the statistics. It's not just guesswork. It's clear and apparent. So at Westbury, we decided, as small as we are, and we are the David in your example, Candace, going against the Goliath, but as small as we are, we know, as you said in the opening statement here, that we are the change we want to see in the world. And we were going to do, from our little perch, we were going to do what we could to try and equalize that. And that's why I'm happy to have the opportunity to tell your clients and the people that are listening in that there is a way forward, that we can do this. And so what we did in Westbury is we launched a program to try to ensure that our construction project would try and overcome that disparity. So what do? We put into our bid document that everybody bidding on our contracts had to make a good faith effort to hire as their subcontractors minority and women-owned firms. And then once we had those firms on board, we didn't just forget about it. We created a monthly reporting document where, as we go through the contracting process, our primes have to report to us the percentage of subcontracts that they let out to MWBEs. And I firmly believe that what gets measured gets managed. But then we put some teeth behind that. And we said, if you don't provide us with that monthly report, then we're not going to honor your claim to get paid that month. And we will not honor it until you submit that documentation to us. Then, for those firms that were having difficulty identifying MWBEs for their subcontracts, we provided them with MWBEs that we felt met the qualifications to be able to win those subcontracts. We also turned them on to the Nassau County Office of Minority Affairs, who has their own list, to make sure that they had access to a wide universe of MWBEs that were qualified to win those contracts. So that's what we've done. We've achieved, you said 45%. It's actually, I'm happy to report, 65%. And we're just very pleased by that. We have recently awarded a contract to a vendor for an energy performance contract. And we made that bid process, in fact, they scored points based on their commitment to hiring MWBEs, and the winning vendor committed to a 62% level of MWBEs. So that's what we've done. That's what we're going to continue to do. And we look forward to many opportunities to talk about it.
That's amazing, Robert. And I hope that other school districts and other public entities were kind of taking note as to how you did it. And hopefully we can see more of that replicated. But I want to say...
Sorry, Candace, I'd like to say that private businesses should do the same, right? We're doing that in our supplier effort. I really applaud and love, what you're doing, Robert, and both Roberts. And it sounded exactly like what we're trying to do. I was pleased that my department's got a 50% on the NWV, and the other executives are racing to catch up. But it holds true for privates as well, that we control how we spend and what we spend, and we have the same ability as you do to insist. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, Candace, but I love that point, and I really wanted to drive it home.
I'm so glad that you brought that point in, Hoyt, because you're 100% right. It's not just for public entities, private sector, of course, have that same responsibility. And I'm so glad to hear about what you're doing at your company. And thank you for highlighting that message that this is for everyone. We all have a responsibility to make sure that we level the playing field. And I do want to stay with the issue of contractors and business owners. And first I'll turn to our panelist, Wesley Alexander, who's the CEO of CoBiz Richmond Incorporated. And CoBiz is located in California. It's just, but such an interesting and intriguing model. It's a co-working space with a community of entrepreneurs, professionals, and creatives who are moving with a purpose, as Wesley likes to say. And when it opened its doors, it came about in a really unique way. It not only serves as a beautiful state-of-the-art co-working space and business incubator, but it is also helping to revitalize the urban neighborhood of downtown Richmond, California. Although Richmond is only about 50 miles from Silicon Valley, there is a world of difference in terms of the lack of resources and opportunities for Richmond's residents to succeed. And these large societal gaps in everything from education to business opportunities, healthcare, and technological access, they have become so pronounced, not only in California, but across our nation, especially due to the current COVID-19 pandemic. And when the Chevron Energy Company decided to invest in sponsoring CoBiz, they were looking to encourage small business development and to prepare Richmond's residents for the workforce. So the concept of CoBiz is pivotal. It seeks to accomplish development without displacement. It allows for a major corporation to not only profit from urban communities, but also to have meaningful partnerships with these communities. So Wesley, as we turn to you, you interact with innovative minority business owners and entrepreneurs at CoBiz every day. What are the concerns that these business owners and entrepreneurs express to you? And can you tell us what steps can private businesses and public entities take to remove some of the barriers to success faced by these minority business owners and entrepreneurs?
Well, afternoon, Candace, and to all the panelists. I appreciate your efforts to be a part of change. I know it's not easy, but right now is the time for encouraging people to step up to the challenge of being stewards for the next generation, because it does not only affect just minority entrepreneurs or people who are minorities, but it affects the entire country. So I appreciate you guys' efforts. With that said, in terms of the question, I think it's really important to understand that when you're looking at underserved communities or just minorities as a whole, they have talent like any other people. They have a vision, they have a purpose, and a lot of times because of historical redlining, they've been disconnected from having access. When we say access, it comes from education, goes down to capital. There's also access to the best practices. When we talk about technology, it's more about practical adoption of the technology so they can be successful. When it comes to spaces, actually having a safe space where they can gather and meet other like-minded individuals and be able to feel inspired and feel supported on their journey. Those are some of the things that also of great concern to them. Additionally, when we think about the needs of minority entrepreneurs, traditionally the ecosystem is not supportive of them. So for example, the efforts that both Roberts and Mr. Hoyer are doing in terms of trying to facilitate access. That's the private sector as well as the public sector, trying to make sure that minorities have a seat at the table to be able to participate. And usually in underserved communities, the minority entrepreneurs speak of, hey, they're gatekeepers, they're property pimps. In the bank system, there are policies and interest rates that adversely affect them. There are additional hoops they have to jump through. And so ultimately, what we're trying to do, let's say here at CoBiz, is to create a mindset, to create a community, to also bring in the experts to be able to come into this area and have the conversations that you traditionally see, let's say in Palo Alto or in Stanford or in the more Silicon Valley, more affluent areas. We're trying to make those conversations readily available here. We're also trying to have consistent access to things such as procurement. What does it mean to be a certified business that can compete for bids at the federal and the state and even the city level? Those are things that for a lot of minority entrepreneurs are somewhat foreign. Topics such as export-import. A lot of times people have no idea there's an export-import bank. They have no idea how they can kind of participate and expand their reach in terms of their customer base, not just from a local or regional basis, but into international markets. These are conversations that they're not having in high school. A lot of times when they go to college, they may not be exposed to. And then when they become entrepreneurs, it's somewhat foreign to them. So ultimately, we're trying to provide access in terms of not just the information, but also help people create a roadmap to success. So our space also offers an incubation program, which we call Strategize First. And that's where we're working one-on-one with individuals and saying, we can't create a cohort like 500 startups or Y Combinator and say, hey, minority entrepreneurs, you're part of an incubation program and 6 weeks from now or 3 months from now, you should be successful. We realize that there's unique challenges that they have to address. And so we want to make sure that we can help them navigate their personal challenges in terms of, hey, is this the right time for you to become an entrepreneur? If you're going through a personal situation, you may need to first resolve that, and then let's transition into what's necessary for you to be successful as an entrepreneur. And these are considerations traditionally in more in communities that generally have more access, things they don't have to consider. So ultimately, when it comes to the needs of minority entrepreneurs, I just want to emphasize a few things. One, we're living in different times, and the definition of what an entrepreneur has to change. We have creatives that are phenomenal entrepreneurs. When we think about nonprofits, a lot of times they're significant in our communities. We need to also change it. We need to also have them think like startups. Recognize they creating value, they're creating employment, they're creating access as well. So they need to also have access to capital, to best practices, to understand how to use social media as a vehicle to help spread the message and attract support and also reach a target audience. Startups, a lot of times the young people who have these great visions or great concepts, they're totally clueless about the principles that a lot of times are critical to creating your MVP, which is which they call the minimum viable product, to allow them to go before an angel investor or before a venture capitalist to be able to conduct their pitch and showcase what they're doing. So ultimately, access is really the most critical piece. And I think for communities where traditionally access has been avoided, it's really important to have a space where they can come together and have people that they trust. That's a big component. A lot of minority entrepreneurs have expressed to me is that we feel comfortable with you, that we can kind of open up and be vulnerable about what we're trying to do without feeling judged, without someone speaking down to me, where someone's actually trying to empower the vision that they have so they can become successful. So those are some of the few things in that regard.
Yeah, thank you, Wesley.
Oh,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Please continue.
I'm just going to address the second question in terms of the steps that businesses and public entities can take to remove some of these barriers. The first thing I really want to focus on is that a lot of the companies, let's say, for example, like Intel Corporation, they would invest heavily into the local high schools where they reside to make sure that their STEAM programs were kind of creating pipelines into careers that, let's say, the company was looking to have in the future. And a lot of times when kids are getting that exposure at a very early level, they get a certain level of expertise, and eventually they say, hey, I may want to spin off and do my own thing. I may want to create my own startup. And so for a lot of the private enterprises that are trying to figure out how can they help remove those barriers, if you're located in a community, or if you do business significantly in a community that is underserved, bring those innovative programs into those particular school systems. And if those school systems are something you don't trust, there are stakeholders in those communities that you can connect with and, quote unquote, park those programs in those particular spaces so that those young people can have access to what's possible. This is really important because there's an industry called photonics, and it's, I believe, sorry, I forgot the town in New York, upstate New York, but it's a photonic center of the world. But right now, the J-1 visas that we import to work in that industry is ridiculous. And we have all these bright young people here in this country who don't even know what the industry photonics is. But yet, if you're talking about satellite technology and we're talking about military technology, that's where it's at. And it's probably going to be here for decades in terms of the demand or the need for that particular, talent in that particular arena. And yet, I'm pretty sure if we went into any school system in Brooklyn, you wouldn't, or here in Richmond, kids would be like, photonics, what's that? So I think ultimately, that's a key component, is investing in the young people so that we can create that pipeline of entrepreneurs. Additionally, there's quite a bit of veterans who are in need of support, disabled individuals who are in need of support, disabled entrepreneurs who are in need of support. And so a lot of the private and public sector touches those different audiences. And I think if they emphasize that they have programs that are trying to cultivate entrepreneurship to those particular individuals, we will see more and more visibility of those unique stakeholders as entrepreneurs, as well as it will create goodwill between the private sector and those communities. And I think that's something that currently does not happen at the level that it should happen. I also want to emphasize that every single, for Fortune 500 companies, in general, they all have a community relations department. And so the same way Wells Fargo CEO mentioned that they can't find diverse talent, well, that's completely false. But more importantly, it's not hard to reach out to communities and try to figure out what's possible. If you have the resources, you have a dedicated person, sometimes it's a phone call, sometimes it's a short drive within a 60-mile radius, just to connect with people, let's say in Harlem or in a rural area in upstate New York, or let's say, for example, here in Richmond, California, and just being able to have that conversation, people will birth ideas and collaboration. The collaboration will create opportunities. Something else that I think is important to highlight, let's say when it comes to financial institutions, most residents and most individuals aren't aware of the CRA requirements of the different banking and financial institutions. And so they don't even understand it's an option where they can speak to a CRA officer, seek sponsorship, seek support for the activities they're trying to do. And so I think right now, banks need to do more in terms of engagement, aside from just speaking to somebody, but literally communicating what are our CRA requirements, what are the things that we're trying to do to have an impact in the local ecosystem, so that these terms aren't just known by those who are sophisticated or have a more, have had exposure, but can be something that hits the ground level. That's something I think is really important as well.
Sure. Wesley, what is CRA? What is CRA?
So it's community reinvestment activities that the banks are responsible for doing. I think if I recall, it's from I believe it's 2008 when they got the different relief due to all the loan shenanigans that they had in 2008, that they are responsible for supporting local activities that have an impact in the communities that they operate in. So.
Great, thank you so much. And you gave us such a full response. I think you beat me to the punch with my next question, which was going to be how companies who may be interested in forming meaningful partnerships with minority businesses can possibly develop their own co-biz in their own community. And I think you touched upon the fact that it's really only a matter of picking up the phone or taking a short drive sometimes and connecting with those communities who the companies may want to impact. Was there kind of anything you wanted to say to close out that question?
Yeah, definitely. So right now, traditionally, when it comes to development of communities or even entrepreneurs, it's usually a top-down approach. And right now, everyone's kind of emphasizing that community wealth approach, using a bottom-up approach is a more effective way to proceed. So in any community trying to have impact, there are people who have been on the ground for a number of years, who have the relationships, who are anchor institutions that you can connect with and really build relationships with those individuals, with those institutions, and understand what their needs are instead of dictating to them what they should do. Collaborate is a key word. From the collaboration, you're able to understand, and from understanding, you're able to produce or you're able to create an initiative or some type of program that can actually be impactful, that can be measured, that can be that allows you to quote unquote, let's pivot if you realize something's not working. And it makes ownership. What it is, it creates ownership that is joint compared to saying, hey, we're coming in and telling you what you need to do, and then the people that you're serving are like, okay, well, do it all for us. And when you have a collaborative environment, now people will feel like they're a part of the solution, not receiving, instead of receiving, I guess you can say, a handout in that regard. Additionally, I think transparency is really, really critical. A lot of times, trust is something that has been broken, whether it's in the public sector or in the private sector. And so the transparency is a really powerful tool. The graph that Mr. Roberts shared earlier and some of the data points he's able to highlight, that kind of puts everybody on equal footing to understand where we're at and where we need to go. So that's something that can be really, really transformative. Additionally, I always ask the leaders or the people who are at the table who are trying to, let's say, create a code base in their own community or communities they want to serve. I challenge them to think about the services or amenities you have in your community and just list them out. And then think about the communities you're going into and do a comparison. It becomes pretty stark, the difference that you can see the difference. It's like night and day. And if you ask yourself, why is it? I think it kind of provides a different level of motivation to understand, okay, yeah, these young people need a place where they can create a go-kart, and they can have a go-kart race, or they can speak to an engineer, or they can have a pitch competition, or they can have access to grant writers to help them get the funding that they need to provide more effective services, versus asking them to take 50% of the time to create grants when they don't have the bandwidth to do so. So it's all these little things, I think, if leaders are really, really dialed into the needs of a particular community and understanding the difference between traditionally underserved communities, it brings a different level of almost sensitivity to how we should address things and how we should, why it's important to not just do it because it sounds good, but do it because it's actually important.
Right, that's such a perfect place for us to leave off there. And thank you, Wesley, so much for those comments. I wanted to turn now to Chantel Simmons, who's the Director of Human Resources at the Episcopal Diocese of New York. Just to kind of describe the diocese, the Episcopal Diocese of New York is a not-for-profit religious organization with 199 congregations in the New York City boroughs of Staten Island, Manhattan, the Bronx, and several neighboring counties. So Chantel, if we could turn to you, you have an impressive background in the area of human resources with experience that spans from the private sector, working for financial firms, to now working at a not-for-profit religious organization. In your time as a human resources professional, when you hear phrases such as, the candidate is just not a good fit, or the employee is not leadership material, how do you respond in order to make sure that unconscious racial biases are not playing a role in the decision-making process?
Thank you, Candace. First, I want to say thank you for inviting me to be a part of the panel. And I'll try to be as concise as possible. My immediate next question to that leader or the panel, whoever it is that I'm talking to, is, what do you mean by that? Let's talk about that more, or say more about that. I think it's important for managers and leaders just in general in the hiring process, or when we're looking to promote someone, to really talk about and describe what the person has or does not have as it relates to the role or the job or the next steps for leadership. and not to just simply be able to get away with not a good fit. I do believe, and my philosophy has been in HR, if we don't respectfully challenge our leaders or the panel or those that are talking about this person's future, in those moments, sometimes in a more thoughtful way, sometimes those moments allow for those unconscious biases to seep in. I love how you started the program with, this is not a spectator sport. So oftentimes you may have to do the thing or say the thing that may not be the most comfortable thing to do. But if we really want to get at the heart of changing or shifting or pivoting these injustices, you have to kind of get in the game.
Absolutely. Those are such key comments, Chantel. Thank you. And I also wanted to talk with you about minority contractors, which we've spoken about a bit with some of the other panelists, but I think you give a unique perspective, being that you have such great experience in the area of human resources in particular. So you participated in the decision to hire a minority contractor to perform certain custodial work for the diocese. And if you were not there, perhaps that opportunity would not have been extended to that minority contractor. How can individuals in human resources leadership positions use their voices and use their influence to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I think we did speak about it a lot in this on this webinar. But one of the ways in which I do it is sort of small steps. So I sort of think about what my organization typically uses by way of vendors. So in the past and currently, some of the vendors we may have had to have are things like graphic designers, writers, cleaning contractors. So I create what I call a hot sheet or a cheat sheet of these of vendors that I could certainly either recommend to some of the parishes if I'm talking about where I currently work, or internally on the bishop's staff. I recommend or I ask that people at least get 3 quotes or 2 quotes when they are looking to hire a vendor to do something for us. I create this hot sheet so that we've got a list of minority vendors in which we can at least go to and select 1 or 2 of them in which we can reach out to and ask for a proposal on whatever it is, whatever the work is that we need to be completed or done at the organization. So that's just a small quick thing. I think I loved what Wesley said just a moment ago. Sometimes it's those small things, those initial steps. Oftentimes, diversity, equity, and inclusion sometimes can seem so big, and taking the first step kind of daunting, but you just have to step out there and just start doing some of the smaller works, some of the smaller things that you can do to make a difference.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chantel. And here I do want to give the code for COE credit. The code is Racial Justice 2020. Once again, Racial Justice 2020, and we'll put that in the chat box so that everyone can see it. But we do have until 1:15, so I am happy to continue what I believe is a really great discussion. And we're going to turn back to Robert Feliciano now, because within this past year, the Brentwood Board of Education approved groundbreaking resolutions. First, you made the Eid Muslim religious holiday an official school holiday. You also recognized Juneteenth, as an official school holiday. And you voted to change the observance of Columbus Day to a holiday which honors Indigenous peoples. Last but not least, the Board of Education is also currently deliberating the retirement of the district's use of the Indian as the Brentwood School District mascot. So the question, Robert, is why did the Brentwood Board determine that it was important to recognize Eid, Juneteenth, and Indigenous Peoples Day as official school holidays? Why did the board choose to take steps towards the retirement of the Indian as the official school mascot. What is it about this moment in time that made it so critical for you guys to make those decisions right now?
Candace, so I have to correct one of the items that you did post, and that was that the Eid holiday was something that we did this year. I have to, correct the record, because I think that this reflects the answer and my perspective much better. The Eid holiday was something that we chose to celebrate right in the middle of the president's travel ban from Muslim-centric countries. It was years ago. I want to say that it was probably two and a half years ago that we did this. And again, this was, this wasn't just symbolic. This is about addressing the value system that you're using for the community that you serve. We have a large Muslim community within the Brentwood School District. Hearing that there was an assault on this community just means to me that there's an assault on the entire community. It's not just an assault on the Muslim community. It's not just an assault on their religion, but it's the value system that we're using that's being assaulted. So we did this, I want to say 2.5 years ago. We decided to celebrate the Eid holiday. What we did was we reached out to the Muslim leaders within our community. We asked them how it was that we could come together and bring them in to the Brentwood community, and so that they knew that they had support, so that they knew it wasn't going to be, they weren't isolated, that we did value the culture and what it was that they were bringing to the table and to the Brentwood community. So that was done years ago, and I am incredibly proud of the fact that we did this right in the middle of that discussion, the travel ban and all of those anti-Muslim efforts that were being perpetrated against this entire community. Insofar as the Juneteenth, Indigenous Peoples Day, and removing or attempting to remove the mascot, as I mentioned before, it's not just symbolic. This is about creating and changing the value system that we have. How can we go on and celebrate a day that had caused so much suffering in the Native American community? How can we not celebrate the end of slavery by acknowledging just one day of the year, which would be Juneteenth, insofar as trying to remove the mascot for the Brentwood community? This is a long time coming. It's absolutely been a long time coming, and I guess the question that I have often asked myself is, what is it that we are doing about addressing the things that we watch around us? We see the inequities, we see the injustices, and as so many of the panelists have already responded, this is not a spectator sport. This is something that, if you are in that leadership capacity, this is a all hands on deck. This is a do or die kind of moment in the history of this country. You have to decide between fight or flight. It's a decision between wanting to agonize or organize as a response to what's being perpetrated upon you and the community. And for that matter, everybody else in this country that's having the same experience. I'd love to try to summarize that we're discussing, the items that we're discussing and the topics that are being brought up are not, new ideas. Candace, I believe that you opened up the statement by saying that this was, these are values that were based on the founding principles of this country, that all men are created equal. To me, it's a fundamental idea that's worth the daily stress and sacrifice and sleeplessness. You know, the question that you have to ask yourself is, how many more generations of Black and brown people have to die, which essentially becomes, you know, a race issue? How many more generations of women of all color will be denied the right to choose what to do with their own bodies? That's a women's issue. How many more anti-Semitic, how much more anti-Semitic rhetoric do we need to hear, which is a religious freedom issue? How many more generations of working class Americans will be denied access to basic health care, which is a class issue? You know, if I could just try to bring all of this together, you know, it's not just a Black and brown issue. Social justice issues are more than that. And if I could ask for one thing and get that one issue as a wish, is that I would plead and I would ask and I would wish for that white America stays engaged as they are today, because if they don't, then you know, all of these groups that I've identified will, if we don't stand together, will suffer as a whole. This is much more than a Black and brown issue. This is an assault that's being perpetrated on so many more Americans than just the ones that we've identified today. Yeah,
that's everything you said, Robert, is just so important. And I really thank you for emphasizing all of those points. Thank you so much. And you, really set the record straight as to why Brentwood has done what it's done, and the fact that it goes way beyond just making a holiday on the calendar. It goes to the very value system and to the belief system that we're trying to put out there into the world. We do have a question that's come in that I would like to direct to Hoyt, if that's okay. The question is,
can I just add that, you know,
sure,
part of those resolutions that we put into place, recognizing these holidays, also had, and this was, I think, you know, something that we owe a debt of gratitude to you, also had a curriculum component that, you know, that went along with recognizing these holidays. So not only are we recognizing holidays, but we're also trying to add curriculum that's going to emphasize the value of these days. And lastly, what I am going to say is that the one thing that we are going to be working on, and again, I want to thank Mr. Troiano for bringing this up, is that this idea of, you know, the WMB in school districts and the value that they have, that's something that we are absolutely going to just copy and paste. So, Mr. Troiano, we are going to be reaching out. We're going to try to get all that information for you, and that is something that's going to be in the pipeline. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Robert. Much appreciated. Hoyt, if it's all right for me to ask you this question that's come in from the audience.
Okay.
Because you talked about the difficult conversations that you had at your company in order to try to move things forward. And it's not always comfortable to put these ideas out there. The question is, how did you approach the topic of white privilege without creating an environment of accusation? The person says, I have experienced people becoming very defensive and closed down to conversation because they do not personally have a background of racism and feel that they're being targeted as being racist because of their own race. So how did you go about having those difficult and sometimes uncomfortable conversations in a way that was productive?
Okay, so just as briefly as humanly possible, and with deep humility and thanks to the other panelists, I spoke about the order of readings, the order of issues, and although in the original multi-week conversation everything came out at once, and people really leaned into those conversations, led by our CEO, and the leadership is really important, which is wonderful to see. CEO Alexander and Presidents Feliciano and Troiano, you know, just leading organizations and setting that bar, right? If he hadn't done that and said, I'm not here as CEO, you can disagree with any idea I have, if I'm uneducated on a lot of this stuff, that set the ground. You begin with, the historical and well-documented, bias that freedom wasn't free, and that, from slavery came subjugation through sharecropping and Jim Crow and the rest of it, which graduated into redlining and so forth and so on, which, just sets a stage for someone to better be able to understand the baggage, we carry. And then as you move through that into unconscious bias and then out of unconscious bias into a discussion of white privilege, you've created a backdrop that in the conversation that hopefully can allow for that to ease its way in. These conversations were not easy. These conversations did have some misunderstanding, some misperception, some disagreement, but because we created the space that allowed people to voice these things without fear, and to understand that those people, white participants, were just as committed and leaning in allyship, right? That it prevented the conversation from breaking down, as the questioner mentioned, and the way it was approached was to kind of talk about things that we carry that others don't. For example, if you decided you were going to go out and have a jog, and you happen to be a Caucasian male, and you decide you're going to go jog, surely you're going to be concerned about the potential danger in a neighborhood that you may be jogging through. You may not have that extra thought in the back of your mind that a police stop could lead to you being shot. You may not have that. That may just not be there for you. When you go into a store, you may not regularly perceive somebody visibly noticing you and potentially following you around the store. You may or may not have had an experience where a cab passed by someone of color just 20 feet away from you to come pick you up, right? You may not have seen that happen, but hearing everyone talk about it from Spike to Denzel to Will Smith to, Michael Jordan, you get an understanding that there is a privilege, that there are things that as a Caucasian person you may not, in all instances, have to worry about. And there's certainly a lot more that someone of color does have to worry about. And so approaching it with a delicateness that says, I understand that you are interested in leaning in and understanding more about what we mean. But our CEO did make the point that and others as well, that the words white privilege do come across in a strong way for some people. And so, we're working our way around how to, introduce that. And I think our decision to include the white privilege educational readings toward the end of that journey will make them land more softly.
That's remarkable. Thank you so much, Hoyt. In the couple of minutes that we have left, I wanted to know if perhaps I could give Robert Troiano the final word, because Westbury has hired a number of minority employees, everyone from teaching staff to support staff, administrators. And I wanted to kind of end on a high note to inform other school districts how they could kind of do what Westbury did, because it is important to have those role models in the classroom and to make that real push, that real effort towards increasing the number of minorities on our staff. So Robert, if you could unmute and talk to us about that, it would be wonderful.
How did you know, Candace, that I was on mute?
I've known you a long time, Robert.
Again, it comes down to being focused on putting attention on making it happen. And for too long, we heard that we can't find African-American teachers, or we can't find Spanish-speaking teachers. They're just not even available. And so what we did was to create a partnership with some of the local education universities that have education majors or graduate degrees in education, so that they knew that Westbury was looking for teachers, number one, and then in particular, minority and male. This is maybe a reverse discrimination here, and male teachers. So we created a mechanism for a pipeline from those institutions to the Westbury School District. We also made great use of social media, particularly to those students at those schools, so that they knew that we were in a hiring mode and what we were looking for. we started diversity recruitment fairs where we would invite students that were going to school to become teachers to come and see Westbury, to hear about Westbury. We staffed those recruitment fairs with some of our top administrators and some of our top teachers to sell the Westbury story. So when graduation came and they're looking for jobs, they would come to Westbury. The end result of that is that in the last 2 years, we have far exceeded the state average for hiring Black, Hispanic, and male teachers. The last 2 years, the average is 79% of our new hires are either Black or Hispanic, and 70% of our current probationary teachers are either Black or Hispanic. So it comes down to putting your money, if you want to say, where your mouth is, and establishing programs to make it happen, then monitoring it and make sure that your programs are being effective. And we're very happy with the results we've achieved. And I'll also tell you that I mentioned that 70% of our probationary teachers are Black or Hispanic. The last 4 of our administrative hires have either been Black or Hispanic as well. You know, and so why do we do that? I think it's important, one, because of our population is over 90% Black or Hispanic. And it's important for them to see people in position like that, to be role models for them. But even if we were an all-white district, I would still want to have that program, because it's important for people of all cultures, for people of, you know, for white students, and to also be exposed to Black and Hispanic teachers, because they're going to see that in the real world. And it was somewhat startling to me that a study that was done of Long Island districts, that there are actually some Long Island school districts that don't have any teachers of color. And that's just got to turn around. It's not good for their students. It's just not good. It's not what they're going to see in the world. So that's the why and the how.
Thank you so much, Robert Troiano. Thank you, Hoyt Webb. Thank you, Robert Feliciano. Thank you, Wesley Alexander. Thank you, Chantel Simmons. This was such a fabulous discussion. I hope the audience was as captivated as I was, and I wish all of you a great afternoon. Thank you so much and take care.